The following video has been produced by Legacy Conversations, and I really want to thank them and Chris Hoare for allowing us or giving us permission to share this story that involved so many Rhodesians. The story, of course, is about Colonel Mad Mike Hoare and is told to us by his son, Chris Hoare. So without further ado, thank you so much, Legacy Conversations. Here it is.
Welcome to Legacy Conversations, a channel where we preserve military memories and history.
Hello, Internet. I'm excited today, and I'm really excited because I've been waiting for a long time to speak to a man across me. If I say a long time, I mean from about 1981. And that's a long time, because that is when I first really became aware of his father, who is the late Colonel Mike Hoare. Rest in peace, sir. So we have here his son, Chris Hoare. And Chris is an author, and he also knew his dad, obviously. And he's here because I asked him to come on the show and explain to us about Mike Hoare, about himself as well, the man behind the books. All of you know who's Mike Hoare, but if you don't know, Chris, welcome. Thank you once again, sir. We're really grateful for your time. And I apologize that you had to wait so long. I also want to say to you guys, if you have questions, please leave it down here, because Chris has told me he's willing to come back and answer questions in a few months from now. So just leave your questions here, but keep them. You know my rules. Don't become snotty and liberal to me. I will definitely react. Hello everyone, just a short announcement. Won't take much of your time. People have been asking me, how can you assist the channel? You know, we've been going on now almost 4 years. We've recorded almost 1,000 videos, and we were fairly successful. We are close to 4 million views, and we are very close to 1 million hours of being watched. So we've done a lot to boost the image of the SADF and the SAP, and we will carry on doing it for as long as possible. But we do need help. We do need you to support us in any way you can. Spread the word. Make good comments, give it a thumbs up, and also if you wish, join the Patreons. That's for $5 a month. Of course, if you want to make it $20 or $50, you're more than welcome. There's about 50 of you who's doing that right now, out of 100,000 a month who come here to look at the videos. And that really assists us, because that, in the first place, makes us feel good. And secondly, it pays for our Zoom, and we can also use the money if we go on a field trip or if we need new equipment. That's the one way. The other way is you can support us by buying my books, the books I wrote, or the George M. James books, which are all very good books, and it's books which you would be interested in. If you like legacy, you're going to like those books. So we created a brand new channel on YouTube where we discuss only the books. And thus we're leaving the legacy channel alone just to do the military stuff and police stuff and your stories. I will leave the links for Patreon as well as the new YouTube channel. I'll leave it in for you in the description. Thank you. Let's get back to the video. So Chris, how does it feel, man? How does it feel to have a dad like Mike Hoare?
Well, I'm certainly very proud of him, and I get a lot of comments on social media and emails. People write to me and they say, you should be proud of your dad. He was extraordinary. He was a hero, you know, and comments of that sort. And for myself, because I once asked my dad, why did you go to the Congo? You know, what was the real reason? And he said, my boy, it was so that you and your brother and sister would grow up speaking English, not Russian. And so that, I think we must be grateful, because now in 2025, we don't remember the situation in the early 60s when, you know, there was a red under every bed and the commies were coming. And of course, South Africa was well, let's put it this way: if the Congo fell, then the Rhodesias were next, and then it was South Africa. And South Africa was a glittering prize. There was the sea route around the Cape, and there was the gold. I looked it up. 25 million ounces of gold were mined in 1960. So that's a lot of gold. So I think we can say it was a real threat. And it was people like him. People used to say to me, your dad is the one guy who got off his ass and did something about what he believed in. And he believed the communists were coming, and he believed somebody had to do something. And of course, there were other reasons why he went to the Congo, and probably we'll get there. The other thing I've noticed throughout my life is that when people find out that he's my father, they always say the same things. They say, what? No way. That guy's a legend, an absolute whatever legend. And of course he was for many reasons, and I think we'll unpack that as we go along. And they would also say he was an officer and a gentleman. These were the most common descriptions, and they were right. But I could take it further, because I know, looking closely at what he did, that one could add he was an officer and a gentleman with a bit of pirate thrown in. He was an accountant, a qualified accountant. So your average accountant doesn't go to the Congo and fight Simba rebels, but he did, because there was something in his blood. He was mainly an adventurer, and so that enabled him to do what he did. Plus his Irish blood, of course. Other things I've noticed that people say is, for example, one of his officers said that he was ruthless. And I always took this as a bit of a negative. But I gave a talk recently, and a military man came up to me afterwards and said, no. He said, no, ruthlessness is a wonderful quality in a leader. Sometimes you have to be ruthless. And of course, the judge at his trial in Pietermaritzburg, and we will come to that, described him as unscrupulous, and so on. But these things, like water off a duck's back, you can't get upset about that. Not everybody is going to love you. And but I always like to tell how my mother, what she used to say about him. She used to say he was peculiar. And then after they got divorced when I was about 10, she said, they're always referring to him in the same 3 words, which were your bloody father. So, he was not popular. He was not popular to everybody. And my mother's peculiar remark, she would always follow it up by saying, she always said the same thing: given his peculiar childhood, it's a miracle that he was not more peculiar. And so let's have a look at that. He was born into an Irish family. His father was a sea captain out of Rush, which is near Dublin, in Ireland. And all the males, my father's grandfather, great-grandfather, they were all sea captains. And of course, that was an adventurous life, but it was also a very tough life. Dublin to San Francisco around Cape Horn, that is a 3, 4, 5 month journey. What do you eat? And the weather and so on. Anyway, so his father was posted to Calcutta in India as a river pilot, married. There were 5 children. And at the age of 8, Mike and his brother were shipped off to a school in England, as one did in those days. The local schools were not deemed to be sufficient. And after a little while, Mike went to Margate College, which is on the south coast of England. And the interesting thing here is that during the holidays, you couldn't go back to India. So you had to either stay at the school or go to a relative or to a friend. So as often as not, Mike would stay at the school, and it so happened that he was put in the care of a master who, believe it or not, had been a sergeant in the British Army and had fought in the Anglo-Boer War and regaled the boys with stories of fighting in Africa. So, marching from Colenso to Ladysmith, and stories of the war. This man had been at Spionkop. So these stories enthused Mike about the military life. And by the time he finished school, he was ready to join the British Army, go to Sandhurst and become an officer. Unfortunately, for various reasons, you needed money to go to Sandhurst, and there just wasn't money available. So he was kind of forced into accountancy, which he didn't particularly like. But as is so often the case in life, you didn't want that, but it turned out to be quite useful as you go through life. And because he was a great entrepreneur, and so accounting really helped him a lot. But what he did do was he joined the Territorial Army in London, which I didn't realize is a reserve force. And then very soon after that, a war broke out in September 1939. And Mark always said it was the happiest day of his life, because at that time he was an articled clerk earning peanuts. And now he was getting 3 square meals a day, and he was getting a proper place to sleep, and he was being trained, and he was fulfilling his dream. He wanted to be in the army. And he sometimes used to say, my greatest fear was that I would have to go back to that bloody office before Christmas. So he was, with his Irish blood and everything else, he had plenty of fighting spirit, and all he wanted to do was get involved and, fight the war for his country, which I have to say was England by this time, because he had, been brought up in England. He spoke like an English person, with very little accent, I might add. Right, so during the war, funnily enough, he was identified as somebody probably with good communication skills. And so first of all, they sent him to small arms school, where he became an expert on small arms. And then he had to go back to his unit, which was the London Irish Regiment, and train the men in all sorts of small arms. And so, and it wasn't for a year or two that he went to officer school. And I've got his war record, and I was very interested to read the report of how he conducted himself during the course, the officer course, and these words will forever be etched on my mind. He was a forceful and aggressive type who will go far. And I thought, jeepers, my old dad, forceful and aggressive. I mean, he never raised his hand to me when I was a child. He was gentle and polite. So anyway, in a war situation, obviously, one digs deep and comes up with other stuff. Yeah, so then he was posted to an elite regiment, 2 Recce, I think it was called, and they were sent to India, where he was involved in training people in amphibious vehicles. And then the Japanese were coming up through Burma, and the only thing that was standing in the way of the Japanese was a place called Kohima in the northeast of India, and there was a battle there which pretty much marked the turning point in that theater at that time. And so Mike's unit was sent to Kohima, and he was involved in the battle at Kohima. You may be thinking, well, now that you mention that, he didn't see any action until that time. So I think we're talking about 1944, 43 or 44. So he hadn't seen a lot of action. So he saw action there. And then he also was sent to the Arakan, which is in Burma, fighting the Japanese in the jungle, a ghastly experience by all accounts. But what is interesting is that his commanding officer was an aristocratic brigadier by the name of Bernard Ferguson. And Ferguson was Mike's role model and taught Mike the secrets of leadership in war. And the big thing, he said, was you've got to get to know your men. You've got to know their names, and you've got to care for them. And you've got to talk to them all the time. You've got to enroll them in the project. What is it you want to do? They must know. They must be aligned with your leadership. And so that's that is how he came to be such a brilliant leader, I would say, by having this man as his role model. Pretty soon after that, he was posted to headquarters in New Delhi and learned another side of army life, which was the headquarters side, which involved how you run an army, which of course became invaluable when he was in the Congo, trying to get supplies, for example. And the war now was completely different. You're in a big city, and there are girls and parties. And so it was that he would go to these parties, and inevitably he met somebody who turned 25 in India, and they went back to England. 6 now as a major, old to have become a major. He now had to decide what to do, and decided to go back to accountancy and finish his degree, which he did. And then by 1948, he had passed. I mean, Mike, we all think our fathers are clever, but Mike really was a bright guy. He just sailed through the accounting course, and now he's a qualified CA. And Britain in 1947 was extremely cold. There was food rationing, and I didn't mention it, but Mike had his ship had called at Cape Town on the way to India during the war, and he just fell in love with Cape Town. Because why? Because the girls were pretty, the sun shone, and regular blokes drove Cadillacs. So, plus all the stories of Africa when he was a boy, he had to go there. So they settled in Durban. I had been born by this time. And he went into accounting, but he couldn't make a go of it. The locals had everything sewn up. And so he started a business, which turned out to be to do with motor cars. And pretty soon he had 6 or 7 motor car related businesses going, spare parts, car hire, Vespa scooters, another branch in Pietermaritzburg, and all sorts. So, and he did well. And I mention that because a lot of people say, oh, yes, he just went to the Congo for the money. He actually had done very well before the Congo, and it's not that he needed the money. He went there for other reasons. But, pretty soon, his adventurous spirit started dominating, and he started hiking in the mountains. He started hiking across Basutoland, which is called today Lesotho, and like 7 days across country. Nobody does that even today, but he did it because he knew how, and for the adventure. And then he got into motorbiking, and his first trip in '53 was from Cape Town to Cairo. The next year, Mombasa in Kenya to Lobito, which was in Angola. And yes, on both trips, there were short sections that you couldn't actually do on a motorbike because the sand was, 2 feet thick and the road was 80 feet wide. So, but there were more adventures back, finding ways across the mountains in Lesotho. And then the lost city of the Kalahari. You see, in the 50s, everybody talked about this lost city that was in the Kalahari, buried just under the sand, and lots of people used to go looking for it. Even Alan Paton, the famous novelist, went on a safari looking for the lost city. And Mike and a friend of his decided to go at the last minute. This other guy dropped out, but Mike went on his own. And of course, he didn't find the lost city. But what he found was an absolute paradise in the form of the Okavango Delta. And it was there that he met a crocodile hunter, and they became best friends. And Mike would go crocodile hunting with him, and he fell in love with that whole area. And he decided that he would now run safaris there because nobody was running safaris. So the following year in 59, he ran 2 safaris, 3 Land Rovers, I think, and 15 men. But the interesting thing here is that one of the guys on the safari was from Durban. He was an American who purported to work at the embassy in some role, but in fact, he was CIA. And I mean, what are the chances? Here, Mike, in the middle of the Kalahari, meets a guy who is CIA and who basically enrolls Mike in the American way of thinking, which, as I explained in the beginning, was how the communists are going to take over. And it was the same guy who, in 1962, told the authorities where they would be able to find Nelson Mandela on the 5th of August, 1962, as he was driving from Durban to Johannesburg, disguised as a chauffeur. You know, we all know the story of how Mandela was arrested, but nobody asks the question, well, how did the police know that he would be on the road? And the answer is Mike Hoare's best friend told them, because he made it his business to know about these things. He moved in those circles. He probably went to that famous party the night before in Durban. Anyway, so that was 1959, Kalahari. 1960, Mike and this CIA guy, Don Rickard was his name, and another man went looking for possibly a new species of ape that was on the loose in Malawi, as it's called now, Nyasaland as it was then. And, you know, it was an innocent adventure. But in the meantime, things in Africa were changing. As we all know, a wind of change began to blow through the continent, and countries were seeking independence. And in 1960, Belgium rather hurriedly gave independence to the Congo. Within days, all hell broke loose, and the richest province, which was Katanga, where they had scandalous quantities of copper and other minerals, decided to secede. And as they said at the time, they were seceding from chaos, and probably that is exactly what they were doing. The trouble is that the rest of the world did not really approve, and the United Nations sent forces in. The Congolese themselves sent their army to the border to try and bring them back into the fold. So the leader of Katanga, whose name was Shombi, decided to raise a mercenary army to bolster his army and retain his independence. And so it was that Mike found himself in charge of 120 men in Katanga. I don't want to put too much emphasis on this episode. It was a bit of a sideshow. Nothing much happened. But it's interesting to ask, why did he go? So we've already said it was not the money. It was partly the adventure, partly the political cause that he could serve, and partly the fulfillment of the command of men, which as a military man was something that he loved and he hadn't had since the war. It didn't end well. They were thrown out of the Congo after a few months, having not done a lot. But what it did do was it introduced Mike to the mercenary way of life. This was the first time in the modern era that mercenaries had been used. And what it did was it gave Mike a name in the right circles, so that later he could be called on again. But in 62 and 63, he ran safaris again. And now here we are in 64, when rebels started controlling the country from the east, and it got to a point where they had taken about half the country, and something had to be done. And everybody knew that the local army, which abbreviated was the ANC, funnily enough, were hopeless. And the story was that they used to reverse into battle so that they could make a quick getaway when necessary. And yeah, so Mike, and here, I don't know this, but I can just imagine that Rickard, the CIA man, would have been standing beside Mike and saying, you go, you go and stop them. You have the training, you have the personality. And so this suited Mike. It was something different from safaris and the motor business. And of course, it was a great success for him. He did 3 contracts, 18 months, and 4 campaigns. And during that time, he and about 300 men who were known colloquially as the Wild Geese, or more formally as 5 Commando, pushed the rebels pretty much out, not quite. In subsequent years, subsequent leaders were able to completely squash the rebellion. But talking about this, I always say to myself, well, why did America funded the whole show? They provided boats, planes, equipment, must have cost quite a lot. Why did they do that and not other wars? And I found the answer in a book, and that is because the Congo has vast quantities of a valuable mineral called cobalt. I mean, these days we all know a bit more about cobalt, but back in the day, cobalt, it turns out, was used for rocket systems and missiles, and not only military, but also in the space race. So if we go back to those Cold War days, it was America versus Russia racing to get to the moon. And Russia had cobalt. America did not have cobalt. But if America could hang on to the Congo, they would be securing their source of cobalt. Yeah, which is quite an interesting revelation, I always think. After the Congo, Mike wrote a book about his time in the Congo. It's called Congo Mercenary. He appeared on the David Frost show in London. much against everybody's advice, because that was a real cutthroat type of interview. But what it did do was it enabled the book to become a bestseller. He sold more than 100,000 copies of the book, and over the next few years, he sought work as a mercenary leader in many places, and he was approached by many people, and usually the story was, we need you to reinstate us, and as soon as we are back in power, we will pay you. And Mike was no fool when it came to money, and he said, no, you pay in advance. And so a lot of those things didn't happen. But on a more concrete note, he did go to Biafra. He spoke to the breakaways and to the government, and in the end, he decided that this was not a good cause to get involved on either side. He also tried to get involved in Rhodesia, and I've seen a proposal that he came up with, how many men and where they would be based and so on, but the Rhodesians didn't really go for that. And there were other places. He was approached to, by this time, some people will remember Shombi had been hijacked in an aeroplane and was being held in a jail. I think it was in Algeria, and Mike was approached to get him out. So there were all these things going on in the background. And after a few years, I think Mike realized that Africa was not he was not going to find any work in Africa, and an opportunity came up in, funnily enough, of all places, Singapore. Now, at that time, there was a lot of trouble in Southeast Asia, and Mike, to his dying day, would never speak about what he did in Singapore. I mean, what he really did. We know what he purported to do. But funnily enough, he was working for an oil company, and alongside him was John Peters. Now, Peters had been in the Congo with Mike, a very tough soldier, and now here he was with Mike again. And it seems pretty certain to me that he was trying to raise an army to go into Cambodia. And one of my sources told me that if they'd been successful, they would have halted 5,000 men. They could have stopped all that terrible bloodshed. I think 2 million people were massacred there. But it didn't happen. The Singaporeans said, no, out. And so Mike was thrown out of Singapore. And he obviously said, right, well, to hell with all this. He had money now. Mobutu had rewarded him well beyond his salary, and he went to Spain and bought a large yacht, 23-meter. Technically, it was a Baltic trader, which had been converted into accommodation. So it was a large, traditional wooden boat that was slow, but it had adventure written all over it. And Mike rounded up the family. I was now 22, and my brother was 19. And so we went to Spain, and for the next few years, Iranian. And Mike, coming from a seafaring family, was living the dream. Yes, he didn't become a naval captain or sea captain, but he had his own yacht, and it was a lot of fun. And then he wrote a book about it called 3 Years with Sylvia, which was also, I might add, an attempt to show himself in a different light. He wasn't just a bad guy who went around killing people. He was a sailor, and the book is actually quite charming. And I might add now that Mike, in the end, wrote 7 books, and they're all on audible.com. You can order them from audible.com as audio books. And here's the kicker. It's Mike Hoare himself is reading the books, which he did when he was about 94 years old. and he does a very good job. So people like that, to be able to hear the man himself reading his books. After that, he went back to South Africa. Yeah, then he tried to go to Rhodesia, and then he was sort of living fairly quietly. When he was approached by the background was that the Seychelles had a right-wing government that was friendly with South Africa and America. But at a certain point, I think it was in 77, socialist leader, chap called Rene, took over. So, of course, this didn't suit America in the middle of the Indian Ocean, but observe what's going on. And so this was a blow for the West. And the right-wingers in the Seychelles were now being alienated. And they said, no, we can't have this. We've got to get our man back into power. And so they approached Mike and said, please, will you help us to reinstate our man, whose name was Mancham. So Mike did 3 trips to the Seychelles under an assumed name. In those days, you could change your name in your passport, and he changed his name to Borrell, and went with various military experts that he knew to assess the situation on the ground, and eventually came up with a plan which was going to cost $5 million. And at that time, of course, 1979, $5 million was quite a lot of money. And the exiles did not have $5 million. In fact, they hardly had any money at all. So then Mike had to come up with what he always called a cut-rate coup plan. And this involved 50 men who would travel from South Africa and remove Rene and reinstate their man. Of course, the question was, what weapons are they going to use? And what they did, the first plan was the weapons were going to be sent by ship in crates of plumbing equipment or whatever it was. That somebody tumbled to that idea, and so that didn't happen. The second plan was that Mike was going to buy a yacht, and the weapons would go on the yacht, and that turned out to be too expensive. By which time the exiles had said, no, listen, we need to get a big power involved here. Can you see if you can get America involved? Now, Mike tried, but they said no. So ultimately, Mike had been on the radar, shall we say, of the NIS, or BOSS, as it was called then, the secret police, because of the nature of his work. And so he asked them to introduce him to somebody who would help to fund this coup, this coup. And ultimately, he was introduced to the SADF, and the SADF agreed to help. And so it was. Mike was living at Hilton, just outside Pietermaritzburg at that time. That early one misty morning, an 8-ton truck pulled into his driveway with enough armament to start a small war. It included 75 AK-47s, 23,000 rounds of ammunition, RPGs, I think there were 15 of those, two-way radios, and all sorts of other military hardware, which they unloaded and stored in a cellar in the house. And But the problem was that these weapons were still in South Africa. So now the SADF then came up with this plan that the men would take them in false bottom suitcase stations and recruiting men. But it was, after all, this was now 1981. The Congo for him had finished in 65, so that's 16 years he had been, involved in other things. He was now 62 years old, and certain mistakes were made. One of the biggest mistakes Mike talked about was, as he rather quaintly put it, the failure of the commander to know his men. The original plan called for the men to all spend time on a game farm somewhere with Mike, where everything would be discussed and planned and so on and so forth. That didn't happen. But also, how do you recruit 50 men in Durban and Johannesburg and expect them not to tell their wives, not to talk about it? So mistakes were made. There's no doubt about it. But anyway, they did. The 50 men, an advance party actually went of nine people from Durban. They checked in their false bottom suitcases with AK-47s. Can you believe it? You couldn't do that today. They checked them in at Durban and picked them up at Mahe, no problem at all. So the charter plane was secured, and again, something that hadn't been planned happened. The plane landed in the Comores to pick up a passenger, which was not part of the plan. Typically, he was a Frenchman, and he had fruit, which was banned in the Seychelles, and they found the fruit, and then they examined the next guy for fruit, and they found the false bottom with a weapon. All hell broke loose. Unfortunately, one of my sources told me that when they arrived, you can't take 50 men into battle on a plane and expect them not to touch a drop of alcohol on the plane. So they had touched more than a drop, and now suddenly they find themselves as night is falling, in a battle at the airport. And Mike said, right, we're going to have to do the coup now. But they got jammed into the building, and nothing was going right. And then a Boeing 707 from Harare, Air India, and bound for Bombay came in against orders, but they had no fuel, so they had to refuel. And Mike always said, the captain said to him, listen, you've helped us by letting us get some fuel. Why don't we help you? And Mike said, no, I am staying here to finish the job. But his men, who were paid soldiers, who didn't know Mike, were rather keen to take this opportunity. And so they forced Mike onto the plane. And so it was that they took off, but they didn't go to Bombay. That is the problem. They went to Durban. And of course, they were arrested, and it's a long story, and it's all in my book. But the point is that they were all found guilty of various crimes, which you could say is hijacking. The senior guys got longer terms. The rank and file got 6 months. My father got 10 years, and of course, this was traumatic for us as family, but what do you do? We did what we could. I lobbied P.W. Botha. We got any number of lawyers offered their services on a pro bono basis. But what really irked us was that at no point did the government say, well, listen, sorry, guys, but we have to do this. We can't just let you roam free, because the rest of the world will withdraw our landing rights for airplanes everywhere in the world. But lie low, give us a break, give us time to sort this out. So the first thing that had to happen was the men who got left behind on the Seychelles, who were mainly the advance party, I think there were 6 of them, had all been arrested, and 4 of them had been sentenced to death. And anyway, it looks like the South African government paid $3 million to get them back. And once they were back, now the wheels could start turning. Mike was in Pretoria Central Prison, and but still no word. But it would appear that the wheels were turning behind the scenes. But what irked us was nobody said, "Look, shut up. We're doing what we can. We will get him out. He will not be there for 10 years." Anyway, it so happened that after about 2.5 years, P.W. Botha granted an amnesty to certain categories of prisoner, and we couldn't believe it when we read what the categories were. They were tailor-made for Mike. You had to be older than 65, you had to be a first offender, and you had to have served a quarter of your term. So it took a little while for him to come out, but he came out in May 1985. And he wrote a book about the Seychelles, of course, called The Seychelles Affair, where he describes everything right from the beginning, and including, you know, you don't read much about prison life in South Africa. So he was able to open a window into that world. And there's a particularly chilling section where he describes what happened in prison when a man or men were to be executed. And he describes how just on the other side of that wall, the friends of the men to be executed would sing all night, you know, to encourage the men who were going to be executed. You know, which I found a very touching passage. So now we are coming into the late 1980s. Mike had discovered while he was in prison an article in the newspaper about something new. It was called the Pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. Of course, these days everybody's heard of it, just about everybody's done it, but not then. So Mike, as usual, was ahead of the game, and he had married, omitted to say this, he had married again and had 2 boys. And so these boys were now in their late teens, and they walked 500 miles of the pilgrimage. And I think it would probably be fair to say that Mike had made a pact with God when he was in prison that if he could get out early, he would do this pilgrimage. And so that's what happened. They didn't get all the way for various reasons. And then Mike went back to London, where he was living, and found an opportunity in France, which he loved. He spoke French. He loved the French. And, you know, I'm embarrassed to say, if the French were playing the Irish at rugby, he would shout for the French. Anyway, he found an opportunity to sort of caretake a chateau in France for a British lord. And this went so well that the lord started paying Mike, and he would rent out the chateau during the summer. The lord would, and Mike would be the man on the spot. And of course, all the aristocratic friends who were now coming to live the life in the south of France were fascinated to know that it was Mike who was the caretaker, and he would always be invited to dinner with them, and he would always be encouraged to tell his stories. And he was a great raconteur, and he knew how to tell a good story. So that was a great success, and that went on for years. I think it was about 15 years he did that. And then in his late 80s, he went to a place near Annecy in the eastern side of France, where one of his sons was living. And he spent about 5 years there. And then his second wife, Phyllis, died. And now Mike was 90 years old. And we said to him, no, look, you know, why don't you come back to Durban and live with us? So that's my wife and I and our 2 children who were teenagers at that time. And so he did. He was based here with us, and now I was able to observe the man who I had started writing about. Until this point, or shortly before, he had always been opposed to the idea of a biography. And I think that was probably for 2 reasons. One was that he was a private person and did not want the world to know about perhaps his ways or his life. And also because he didn't want anybody delving into, shall we say, his background with the CIA and all that sort of thing. And so, but by this time, you know, he was getting on, and I said, now, come on, Dad, you know, I'd really like to do this. And you did tell me once you would give me permission eventually. And so he said, okay. So for the next 12 years, between times, I started researching, and he was living in the house, and I was able to observe his ways. And I mean, I had always known that politeness was a big thing in his life. But what I came to see now, what it was the most important thing in the world was to be polite. And even to the extent, if you had to tell a little white lie or something like that, no problem, so long as it enables you, you know, to be polite. And all my wife's friends said to her, "Are you mad? You're bringing a 90-year-old man who hasn't got medical aid into your house. Your life is going to be hell." But it wasn't so. He was extremely easy to have. He never said things like, "Oh, I'm hungry. When's lunch?" you know, or anything of that nature. And he would spend his days writing. By now, he had written more books: a book on Katanga and a book on of short stories to do with mercenary soldiering, all which happened in the Congo. But now he's now writing a book on the Cathars, who, this is something completely different. The Cathars were a Christian sect who lived in southwest France, in the area where he was, in the Middle Ages, and they believed they were descended directly from Peter, the disciple Peter, and were the purest form of Christianity. They also had some, what I consider, wacko beliefs that when you die, you travel via the stars to some place, you know, unusual beliefs, dualism, 2 gods, and so on. And funnily enough, or not funny at all actually, but strangely enough, the Pope decided that the Cathars were too extreme and gave them an opportunity to recant. They did not. And so this is unbelievable to think that the Pope ordered that they should all be burnt at the stake. And if you stop and think about what that must have been like. Anyway, Mike found this story fascinating, and he went to a lot of the Cathar sites, castles and forts and so on, researched the military side, and started writing a book about it. And by the time he came to us, the book was almost finished. But every day, Mike had a laptop, and he would work from early till late on his laptop on this book. And after a couple of years, I said, "Dad, what are you actually doing with this Cathar book?" And I tell you the story because it's a mark of the kind of man he was, and of his sense of humor. He had a fantastic sense of humor, and he was very, very quick. He loved nothing more than going to a party and meeting an attractive woman who could keep up with him at repartee, word games. And anyway, I got off the topic. So I said to him, Dad, what are you doing? And he, as quick as a flash, he said, my boy, I'm taking out the commas that I put in yesterday. And he knew he was just fooling around. So I said, listen, okay, enough now. And I published that book, and I couldn't believe it. He had so many fans just around here that we sold, I don't know, 50 copies or whatever it was. Yeah, and then after that, he started going gently downhill. He would spend time with my brother in Cape Town some of the time, but mostly here in Durban. And then ultimately, he turned 100. And perhaps at this point, I should tell you his secrets for longevity and good health, because we are all of an age when we could do with some more information on that front. And he used to say, if you're not feeling well, lie down and let the body heal itself. And boy, oh boy, I think there's a lot to be said for that. And he said, if that doesn't help, 2 aspirins. Just take 2 aspirins. But whatever you do, never, ever go and see a doctor. And of course, us men are averse to going to see a doctor for our own reasons. But Mike had a different reason why you should never go. And that was because he'll only find something wrong with you. And so we laughed and laughed at that. But of course, I don't want to give the wrong impression. Occasionally he got pneumonia, and we certainly took him to the doctor. So we had a party for him when he turned 100. I invited, by now I had met some of the wild geese, and so 5 of them came, from Cape Town, Johannesburg, and many places. And I'm rather happy to say that by now I had also got to know Eben Barlow, who was the founder of Executive Outcomes. And I invited him as well to come to the party, which I'm happy to say he did, and many other people. And I arranged things in such a way that everybody would get a chance to say something, to make a little speech, just a short speech. And so the speeches were usually to do with the respect for Mike and what he had done. But after that, he just basically ran out of steam. And on the 2nd of February 2020, which was just before COVID, thankfully, he set off on his last adventure. And yeah, what a life, what a man. And so, but just to go back a bit, I had started writing my book in 2006. In 2018, I published it, and I sold a lot of copies. Until now, I have sold about 4,000 copies. It's also on Amazon. So if anybody's interested, they can buy either the print book, which is $24, or the Kindle or ebook, which is $11.50. There's a link on my website, which is www.madmikehoare, all one word, .com. There's a link there which will take you straight to Amazon. If you live in South Africa and you want a printed copy, you can get it from me. You can also access me via the website, which there's a tab there at the end. It's called Contacts. Just drop me a line. I've got a few copies left. A British publisher is taking it over, so I'm selling off the copies that I've got very cheaply, 200 Rand plus courier. yeah, that's my story.
Man, what a story. I said, yeah, I made 5 pages of notes, my man. What a wonderful story. What a wonderful man. What a privilege. What a privilege to be able to speak to you. I'm so glad you mentioned the book links. Guys, I will put it in the description as well, please. So if you can't get hold of a book, just contact me or contact Chris. We will help you. And definitely, I'm buying one of the last books which I'll be with you. When I'm in South Africa again, I have no idea when. I will definitely come and fetch it or just keep it for me, but I'll transfer the money. But I want to ask you a few things here, just to touch base with people, if you don't mind.
No, sure.
That Battle of Kohima, that's where the tennis court came in, wasn't it? Where they stopped the Japanese tanks on the tennis court, if history serves me correctly here now.
That is exactly right. The Japanese were at one end of the tennis court, and the British, I think it was the Norfolk Regiment, were at the other. And that was where the Japanese finally turned back. You know, if you remember, their supply line was so long that maybe they didn't have enough food or whatever it was, but I think that was a factor. But interestingly, if I may say so, the British Army Museum once held a sort of survey to see, among people who know about the military, army people and members, shall we say, of the museum, which was the most important battle the British Army ever fought in. And they said Kohima was the most important, because if the British had lost there, the whole of India would have fallen to the Japs, and who knows where it would have ended. So, because there was in the next town from Kohima, whose name I have forgotten, there was a huge British Army base, you know, like square kilometers, 15 square kilometers of stores. Anyway, yeah, so that was a turning point in the war.
Yeah, you know, it's always sad to me that it took place just after D-Day, I believe, and so all the attention was on Europe. And the people in Burma and northern India fighting the Japs, they were, you know, sort of forgotten. So I thought to myself, yeah, since I'm in Thailand now, as soon as my wife is home from Switzerland, Swineland, I will, I'll take the car and I'll take her on a drive all the way to Kachaburi, where the bridge over the River Kwai is. And definitely there I will start recording for Legacy as well. But you guys out there just need to give me some time. I want to jump to Katanga, because Katanga is something of a hobby to me. I like Katanga, and to this day I'm really sad that the West never supported Moise Tshombe. In fact, when he got kidnapped there on the aircraft, it was French spies, French intelligence who grabbed him there. And they say it might even have been the French intelligence who murdered him later, because he died as a relatively young man. But I know that Moise Tshombe was also a chartered accountant. And so was your dad. And now you say to me that he could speak French. Do you think there was a link between the two of them with that very unlikely background of him?
All I can say is Mike would have described himself as a Tshombe man. He was pro Tshombe. You know, he approved of what he had done, because if he had not seceded, the mines would have gone out of production, you know, within a number of weeks. Yes, you could say, well, you know, that would only have benefited the owners of the mines, who were the Belgians. But whatever, Tshombe was doing what he thought was right. I don't really have any information about them being especially pally. I know, and I say in my book, that Mike had a meeting with Tshombe in Mallorca, which is a Spanish island in the Med. And Tshombe wanted Mike to raise an army and to reinstate him and so on. But funnily enough, Mike, who was gung-ho and you would imagine would always grab an opportunity to go to war, advised him not to. And so Shambi tried to get other people to reinstate him, but it never happened.
Yeah, and it's sad in a way, because for Congo was never the same. With Chombe, there was hope. There were real hope, I think, that Katanga could have succeeded. And then, of course, Dag Hammarskjöld died. And the UN had his first air raids in the form of the Indian Air Force bombing hospitals in Katanga. I write about this in a few books. Very, very fascinating. Also, this thing that you said about the gold in South Africa, I think, I don't know if it's still today, but they had something like 74% of the world's gold, which is really a lot. And that Macmillan speech, I think it's Harold Macmillan, wasn't it? The Wings of Change. Did he not make that in Cape Town?
He did. Yeah,
and that went right across the world. Yeah,
in Parliament, I think in 1960, and that's when it all started happening.
You know, it's a funny thing. I spoke to a Special Forces commander here on Legacy, Major General Les Rotman, great guy. And I asked him, I said to him, sir, why is it that your Special Forces people would leave the unit and join like a mercenary outfit or a private military company, as we call these days? And he basically answered me something like, you know, of course, these people look for adventure, and if we in Special Forces can't give him the adventure, they will go and find it. And I'm thinking of your dad. Do you think it's the same way he was thinking? Like, he's got the money, he's got the wife, he's got the kids, but he needs to lead men. He needs to lead men in battle.
Yes, he espoused a philosophy which you could say is you get more out of life by living dangerously. You get more out of life by living dangerously. And so, well, I've told you about his walking, about his motorcycle trips, the safaris. You know, these are all adventures. And so now war, probably we shouldn't describe it as an adventure, but it is. And so it wasn't a very big step for him. He had been at war before. So this was fulfilling him. And he believed serving a wonderful purpose. Of course, terrible things happen in war. And what I've come to see is that, and I've come to get the question to the answer. Everybody you talk to whose father was at war will tell you the same thing. He never told me anything about the war. I don't know where he went to war. I don't know what he did. I don't know what rank he had, because he would never talk about it. And I discovered that they don't talk about it because terrible things happen during war. And this reminds me of how in the Congo in 1964, after the fall of Stanleyville, Mike was approached by the British and the Americans and others to rescue their people, who were mainly nuns and priests, who were being held hostage in the most ghastly circumstances, being abused, and the nuns were being raped. And ultimately, Mike and his men were asked, this was beyond their brief, they were asked to go and rescue them from behind enemy lines. And on one occasion, Mike went. Mike always went because he wanted to make sure it happened. And that was the one sure way of making sure it happened. Mike led from the front, and he went. And he took a bullet across the forehead here. I mean, two centimeters the other way would have been a goner. And so it was that they rescued, I think it was 2,000 nuns and priests, 40 here, 50 there, 30 somewhere else, but sometime late. And they would just find white robes on the bank of a river, and they had obviously been shot and thrown to the crocodiles. So I've always said this was his finest hour, to the rescue of these people. Yes, terrible things happened that shouldn't have happened elsewhere. But also this was the big plus side of what happened, rescuing those people, and they were not only white missionaries, they were black, Congolese as well. And I'm sure that that memory would have warmed him in his later life.
Some of them were, of course, eaten. I believe there was some cannibalism or something going on there in the Congo. It still is today. But the rescue of Stanley Belmont is one of those greatest moments which people bloody well should remember. I mean, it was fantastic because you see a mercenary as a tough guy, you don't know where you actually stand with him if you don't stand on the right side of him. But here they showed a lot of compassion and they were risking their lives to go and save these people, but they didn't know these people or anything like that. I mean, it's fantastic. It's a fantastic operation.
Yes, it was. And there's one of the guys told me a rather amusing story of how they had arrived at a mission station and one of the missionaries was standing on the steps saying and refusing to get into the truck to go. And he said to my source, God put me here and God will take me away when the time comes. And so the mercenary said to him, well, God sent me to get you. and he knocked him to the ground and threw him in the back of the truck.
Well, I'm glad he did, because really when those people started coming, there might be foreigners listening to you, and you might not understand the ways of Africa, especially in those years. There were really dreadful things happening. And when we spoke about Cambodia, and I suppose we can include Laos in there as well, that's where the killing fields were taking place. That was Pol Pot. And
yes,
it was the most dreadful thing. It's sad that your dad couldn't move in and prevent that. I've been to Laos the other day. Man, it's weird. It's like being in East Berlin in the old days. I mean, they still wear the same, what I would consider Soviet type of ranks, clothing, everything. Unlike Thailand, nobody ever smiles at you. It's a weird nation, you can feel the suppression. It's really bad. So that's sad. But I want to jump to Seychelles. Because on Legacy, we actually have a commander of a South African Railway Police Special Task Force. He's now our chaplain, would you believe, on Legacy. But at that stage, he was the commander of them surrounding the aircraft to take it back from the mercenaries, which of course your dad were commanding. And what's very funny actually is one of the policemen standing there at the Bravo, who was on the aircraft as a mercenary from, I think, from one reconnaissance regiment. So it was a family affair. We even deployed a couple of female snipers, which we also interviewed here. Very fascinating. And they were worried about it. They were saying that they had the incline of the people on board, because the moment they realized it's Mike Hoare, they put two and two together that Mike Hoare will be with people like Mike Hoare. And so I asked him, I said, now, if you had to go in, what would have happened? And he said it would have been a bloodbath, because at that stage, they didn't know that most of the weapons were actually stored in the hold. Not that accessible, or it could be accessed. I mean, it's not impossible, depending on the aircraft. And then they surrounded it, and I believe a general or something arrived to take the surrender officially. How were you, your mom and yourself and the rest of your family? You must have seen this on TV, plain off, because it was all over the TV.
Yes, it's right. I meet people from time to time who tell me where they were and what they were doing when that plane landed, and a lot of people were impacted. From people who were on honeymoon in the Seychelles to whatever. I don't really think that the men on the plane were ever going to try and fight their way out or go somewhere. I mean, any thinking person would have figured out, yeah, you're never going to get away with it. But yes, it was very big news. We were, well, you see, nothing my dad had done before that had been unsuccessful. And so it was, well, I personally, I couldn't really grasp it and come to terms with it and think, well, surely this is not possible, that it's failing, that a weapon has been found, and so on. And of course, then there was the trial, and it seemed to me from the beginning of the trial that everything that the state asked for was granted, and everything that the men asked for was not granted. Like, for example, the captain of the plane, his name was Saxena, Indian. Remember, at that time, we had no relations with India. Somehow he was not called to give evidence. I think they call it on commission. So a couple of others were called to give evidence in the Seychelles or Mauritius, or I've forgotten where it was. Which seemed like, I mean, how can you hear a trial properly if the captain of the plane who interacted with my father was not called to give evidence, and so on? So no, it was a torrid time. It was traumatic for all of us. But of course, I was no great fan of P.W. Botha myself, but of course, I'm very grateful to him for what he did in the end. Mike served 33 months in jail, and it's a lot less than 10 years, so we are grateful.
Yeah, we should remember at his age at that stage, to send a man of 62, 63 years to 10 years in jail in a South African jail is not an easy place in those days.
Yes.
Today, of course, it can be a damn death sentence, man. And if you think that the South African government definitely was involved, the mere fact that the National Intelligence Service were behind it and the way they delivered the weapons, all of those things. But your dad came out in his books, the Seychelles Affairs. I read it, and it struck me that he was very critical of the National Intelligence Service, NIS. And I think he had every damn right to be. I mean, he found them to be amateurs. They were out of their depths. They had no clue what they were doing, and they were not listening to him, which is the worst thing, and not paying either. Your impression as well, Chris?
Yeah, look, I've intimated already that definitely Mike made mistakes. I once made a list. I think I came up with 10 different items, but in retrospect, one can say he should have said, "Sorry, guys, you haven't got enough money. It's going to be too risky," and that is what happened. But you see, if you put it in the context of the time, Mike's French counterpart, Bob Denard, had not set up a very successful coup in the Comores. And what he did was he bought a boat in France, and he took his men all the way from France around the Cape to the Comores. Nobody knew he was there. And one dark night, they went ashore in rubber ducks, did whatever they had to do, and there was dancing in the streets before breakfast. That was the times that we were living in when those sort of things were being done. They were swashbucklers, and unfortunately this ended badly.
Yeah, it's very true. Legacy, we speak to a lot of people, and we spoke to several people from the 7 Medical Battalion unit, which is like the Special Forces doctors and medics. And a lot of them actually served there on Comores. And because they had a secret listening station, they were listening in on Renamo and what's happening in Mozambique. They would be listening that side. So those islands were very important to South Africa, with landing rights also, but there was the entire espionage thing going on. We didn't know these things, of course. It came out later, so I'm tempted to believe your dad would have heard rumors of this. He would have known something. So he would have thought in the times that this is actually doing the right thing. He doesn't strike me as a man who would be scared to do the right thing. I think he would be one of those who would do the right thing and the rest be damned. Am I correct? Do I say?
Well, to a certain extent, remember Biafra and Nigeria, he declined to get involved there. He declined other offers. He declined to help Shombi, to reinstate Shombi. So not entirely, to hell with the consequences.
Yeah, which makes him a thinking man. I just want to say, in his book again, I read it the other day, Seychelles Affair, I will get the others too. He does mention the court case that at some stage they couldn't hear what the judge and the defense advocates and the prosecutor were saying, which is a major screw-up, in court. You need to know what they're saying that you can defend yourself. And he was also, I got the impression from the book that at some stage he had to start paying for advocates and people to defend his men. Is there truth in that, or do I misremember it perhaps?
Sorry, would you repeat the question?
I think he said in his book, Mike said in his book, that he had to pay out of his own pocket for the advocates and for the defense counsel, not only for himself, but also for his men, who obviously didn't have that kind of money. I mean, these lawyers are very expensive things. But that shows to me that he cared for them, because, Chris, you just testified to me that they didn't really know each other. They haven't had that chance to go and practice. They sort of met the next week they were in the fight. And now they have his court cases, and he comes out and he says, guys, I'll stand by you. Well, what a wonderful man.
Yes. The other men were funded by somebody else. I've forgotten. They put aside a certain amount of money for the bulk of the men to defend them and paid the legal fees. But at a certain point, when the writing was on the wall that this was almost a showpiece trial to show the world that you can't do that, and they're going to be nailed come what may, Mike realized it was only going to end one way, and to fund it from beginning to end, and so part of the trial, and the men had to as well, or arrange their own.
Yeah, I must say we had some internet problems, but I get the gist of what you're saying to me is, yes, there were initial money put in, and then they realized, look, it's a lost cause. We know how this is going to end. And so we just said, okay, well, it's a tough thing to do. I have a last question to you. It's more a statement. I don't know if it's true, but somebody actually described your dad to me as a man born 100 years too late. If he was born in the times of Secundar Barnes and those people, man, he would have conquered countries for the Queen. This fellow is a very senior intelligence officer in France. Actually said to me, Mike Hoare was the last of the Elizabethians. I'm struggling to say that word. I see you nodding there, but perhaps you can explain to us what I mean by that, because I believe your dad was an admirer of Sir Francis Drake, who was, of course, the original Elizabethan. Sorry, that's a hard word for me to say, man. But yeah, do you agree with that, Chris, with the French intelligence assessment?
Yes, quite simply, Mike himself said, and maybe this is a good place to end. And I know this quote so well because he said it more than once. He said, I would like to have been born in the time of Sir Francis Drake. So that was 1488. Out robbing the Spaniards, and when you brought the gold back you knelt before the Queen, and she made you a knight. You were respectable, even though you were a thief.
Yeah, that's a wonderful, wonderful sense of humor. Guys, I just want to say to all of you here right at the end, these books are available, and you can hear the late Colonel, rest in peace, you can hear him tell his story, and you know it's true. When you hear the author speak, there's a lot of things of the author inside these books. If you knew a man, you would know what is, you would just know. It must be a one hell of an experience. So we're going to put in all the links for you in the description. We're going to put it in here at the back as well. Chris, thank you so much. And please, can I also say thank your wife that she accepted the Colonel into your house. We're all grateful to all of you taking care of him. And perhaps just lastly, why did they call him Mike Hoare? Because there was nothing mad about the man. He was just a professional soldier with that in the Cold War thing was an absolute hero.
Yes, I have been asked that question before. You know, if you do anything unusual, you know, if you take a bunch of friends too fast on a dirt road, they'll say, "Are you mad?" You know, you're just having fun. And so I think a journalist must have been on an escapade with him in the Congo, a bit hair-raising, but that's war, you know. And so his name was Mike. Well, what rhymes with Mike? You know, mad. I mean, so many people have said he wasn't mad. He was the sanest man I've ever met in my life. And he was an accountant. You know, he was logical. But in those circumstances, you have to do unusual things.
Yeah, exactly. Who was that fellow who said you sleep safe tonight because rough men are willing to stand up? And sometimes it's necessary. In those days, it was necessary, and perhaps it still is today. And yeah, that's wonderful, man. Such a privilege indeed. Chris, thank you. Thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. And you're invited back. Please come and speak to us again. And guys, all of you, leave your comments here and ask questions. And if we can answer you, we will. And remember, the books are available. Please get hold of them. It's worth reading. It's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and ring the bell to receive notifications.